Okay, hi, I'm Kevin Lanahan. I work for the Missouri Department of Conservation, and I'm here to talk to you about baking accessibility into your website. I've worked on the web since about 1996. I was working for the Department of Insurance. They said, hey Kevin, you like computers, can you build our website? It's like, sure, what's a website? And kind of went on from there when I found out about the federal 508 standards and that Missouri had adopted them around year 2000. Started looking into accessibility. I now work for the Department of Conservation. We started using Drupal in 2009 and just finished last year migrating our D6 sites into D7. And so now we're gearing up for Drupal 8. And that's going to take probably a couple of years to end up migrating. So if you need to tweet, hashtag DrupalCamp St. Louis, win prizes, yay. So, baking accessibility into your site. This is something I overheard at a Birds of a Feather session at DrupalCon in Baltimore. Trying to add accessibility into your site after you launched it is kind of like adding the chocolate chips after you bake the cookies. It just doesn't work, and it's going to be expensive and it's going to be messy. So I want to talk about how do you build this into your development cycle. I'm not going to talk so much about remediation, but we'll touch on some of that, and a lot of the rules here will apply to remediation as well. So in Missouri, we got some statistics. 22%, or about 1.3 million people, have some kind of a disability. 2.5% are blind. That's not necessarily completely blind, but they've got some significant visual impairment. People are deaf or hard of hearing. 800,000 people consider themselves disabled. Some of these are, the elderly. Some of them are, just folks that have lost limbs, vision, hearing, whatever. Baby boomers and Gen Xers are getting older. I've been to a couple of these talks, and it's like, oh my God, they're talking about me. I'm kind of at the tail end of the baby boom generation. And it's like, yeah, my knees don't work, and if I'm working on a computer too long, man, my shoulder starts to hurt. I get some numbness and tingling. People get carpal tunnel. It's like all of these things are disabilities. They may just be temporary, but they're disabilities. People break arms, they get arthritis, they have strokes, things happen. They all use accessibility. And they use accessibility, they use technology and accessibility to workshop, travel, and learn. These are all things that, my gosh, the internet's opened all this up for everybody. We need to make sure everybody has access to it. When I talk about accessibility, I'll abbreviate it here as A11Y. Accessibility has a lot of letters, so between the A and the Y, there's 11 letters. So we just shorten it. So if you see that on the screen, that's what that means. It's kind of a subset of the whole usability thing. It's specifically about using technology to provide equal access for people that normally wouldn't do that. Examples in real life of accessibility, curb cuts, and sidewalks. If you are pushing a stroller or delivering something on a cart, it's like, man, those are great. You don't have to try to run it up the sidewalk. If you're in a bar, you want to watch the game, see what's going on, you got closed captions. Awesome, an accessibility feature. This is great. We want to do this for the web. So, in the United States, 22% of all Americans have a disability. That's 53 million people. If you've got a site that is selling things to people, asking for donations from people, asking them to join up with a cause, 53 million people is a lot of people to ignore. So we don't want to do that. We want to make sure we can bring them in. Now, more interestingly, in the last 5 months, there's been 4 court cases that are pursuing accessibility Winn-Dixie lost a big case back in May or June. Basically their coupons weren't accessible. So, you know, everyone's got coupons on their mobile phone. They weren't tagged. You couldn't tell what the coupon was for. So someone with a visual disability could not use those coupons. The judge ruled that that is not providing equal access. It'd just be like having stairs to get into your store. You can't get in with a wheelchair. Coupons, you can't use coupons that anybody else can use, but you can't use them just because you're blind. They lost. Hobby Lobby, Five Guys, and a company called Blick Art Materials have lost requests to have their cases dismissed because the judges said, no, this is important. We're doing this. The other thing, we don't know how many of these cases settled out of court. I mean, there's probably thousands of them, or well, let's say hundreds, that have come up and kind of gone away pretty quickly. So it's important. Let me go back to the quote here. Spend your hard-earned dollars on accessibility, not on lawyers. Another way to say that is you can spend money to make your site accessible, or you can spend your money on lawyers and on making your site accessible. So it's like, you know, if you can just make it accessible, just do it. So, is there a recipe for this? Because we're talking about baking this in. So, is there a recipe? Well, as it turns out, there is. And that's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These are an international standard. They've been around for a long time, 9 years. It's technology neutral. So if any of you were familiar with the federal 508 standards, they were kind of really geared to the technology of 1999. And so, you know, the things that people were doing on the web, they're like, yes, you can do this or don't do that. One of them was, don't use JavaScript because, you know, people turn off JavaScript because back in the day, it wasn't accessible. There weren't really, it was Wild West. There weren't really recommended ways to say, here's how to use it so everybody can see it. Well, the web changed. 508 didn't. Nice thing is, 508 is adopting the WCAG 2.0 standards. That'll take effect January of 2018. They filed the papers a year ago, and it takes a year for everyone, basically for all the government sites to get up to date on that. So, as I mentioned, I work for the government, and so I have to follow accessibility guidelines. And you could sit there and fuss about it, I could sit there and fuss about it, or I could embrace it. One of the things, I don't really consider myself a particularly imaginative person. I love having standards I can write to. If I can write to a standard, it's like, you know, everything should kind of follow this. So if you write to, if your site is in HTML5, if you make sure your page is validated, guess what? You're a long way towards accessibility. The other things that we're going to talk about here will get you even closer. So, WCAG 2.0, we're going to spend just a few minutes talking about this because this is something that you, even if you don't have to follow 508 or have to be accessible, you can incorporate it into your design process, into your development process, and just keep it in the back of your mind that, oh, there's a recipe for this. So there's 4 principles to this, and we use an acronym POUR, P-O-U-R, perceivable, operable, understandable, robust. And we have a nice little graphic that gives a little bit of definition for it, but I find the definition confusing, so we're going to talk about it just a little bit differently. So perceivable. Provide text alternatives for non-text content. This is alt text. Anytime you have an image, what's in the image? This is real basic accessibility standards. People might not want to know, well, an example, a guy I know, blind from birth, he's a programmer for University of Missouri Hospitals, and he's like, yeah, you know, I don't know what the Mona Lisa looks like, but if I read, if I know I've got a picture of it up on the screen, I can help my kid with her homework. And I can tell them, oh, look at the background, or look at that enigmatic smile, you know, or whatever feature is pointed out in the alt text. It's helpful. They can have an image of this. If you've listened to audiobooks, a good audiobook, if you're listening to fiction, you know, you can see whatever that reader is describing. That's what alt text is. So provide alternatives for multimedia. In a nutshell, easy way, captions. You got videos, caption. You got audio, make sure there's a text equivalent. If it's not read-along text that goes with it, just make sure there's a way for someone else to get that content. A lot of podcasts out there. Podcasts are awesome. You learn all sorts of things. If you're deaf, it doesn't do you much good, but if you can read it, whoa, now you've reached a whole new audience, and there's people that can benefit from your content. So create content that can be presented in different ways without losing any meaning. This is where we get into tables, forms, and reading order. So if you have a table, you're using it hopefully just for data, because you know it's not the 90s. We don't use them for design anymore. Can people identify the content in that table? Do they know what headings and rows are associated with that? Forms, can they identify what form? Whoops, we've lost our video. Okay, after a brief intermission. So the fourth principle of perceivable, make it easier for users to see and hear content. So this gets into letting the user have control over their browser, making sure that contrast is sufficient, making sure that colors are visible to people that may have colorblind issues. Text can be resized. Make sure there's no pictures of text, because pictures of text suck. We don't want those. Operable. Make all functionality available from a keyboard. This is really cool. I mean, unplug your mouse, or hide it, turn it upside down, and start tabbing through your site. What do you miss? What doesn't work? Ooh, you know, you'll be amazed. Especially if you're using, say, Drupal 7 or some other technology to run your site. Give users enough time to read and use content, so make sure you have pause, stop, that they can hide elements, don't have audio start up as soon as the window launches. Fortunately, now the browsers are keeping that from happening, so it makes it much easier for people that are easily distracted or just have a lot of tabs open trying to figure out which ones are open. Don't use content that causes seizures. You would think this is a no-brainer, but a lot of ads, for instance, will flash. And if it flashes more than 3 times a second, that's a problem. So that's baked into the standards here. Don't do that. Help users navigate and find content. This is fun. This is skip nav. So if you've got a nice menu bar at the top, maybe a mega menu, give users a way to skip that, because after the first page, they don't need to see that unless they need to go into that menu. Make sure that focus is visible. Make sure your links are meaningful. Click here doesn't work. It doesn't mean anything. Make sure you're using headings and labels. So H1, H2, H3, paragraphs, lists, all the things that make HTML awesome. Understandable. Make sure text is readable and understandable. What language is it in? What audience are you trying to reach? You know, if you're trying to reach grade school kids, don't write it like a college professor. Make content appear and operate in predictable ways. So again, is your navigation always in the same place? Your sidebars in the same place, so the users know what to expect and where to find things. And then help users avoid and correct mistakes. Again, awesome. You know, how do you get them to the right content? And if they make a mistake, say filling out a form, how do you let them know about it in a way that is meaningful to them? Last principle, robustness. really just means future-proofing. If you write the standards will change incrementally. It'll be much easier to change to a new standard or to update to a new standard rather than trying to rely on something that's several generations old. So years ago, who knew about smartphones? It's like, so accessibility takes practice. Has to be learned. It's a discipline. It's like security. Some of you I know do security. It's, you know, if you're just coding, you're probably going to write something insecure. If you're just coding and saying, hey, that looks okay, probably not accessible either. There's things you can do to make it accessible. And it's okay if your first attempts are a little messy. We have a picture here of an Angry Bird cake that looks like someone just glopped icing on it. It has a cut carrot for a nose and some kind of purple sour candy for eyes. And it's horrible. It's like, you don't want to eat that. Somebody worked really hard on that, though. So what you want to use is Drupal 8. And so Drupal 8, and we've got a nice Angry Bird, professionally made cake. It looks like an Angry Bird. You know what this is. The other one is like, yeah, it took me a while to figure that one out. So Drupal 8 has accessibility built in. And so your mission as a designer, as a programmer, as a developer, is basically to not screw it up. We've got semantic code, which means, hey, we're using paragraphs and headings and things that give the document structure. We have skip navigation built in so that when a user goes to, hits a page, they don't have to hear, like our mega menu on our MDC site, it's about 120 links long. They don't have to go through each one of those. It has ARIA landmarks built in, which basically kind of helps accessible JavaScript. Alt text is turned on by default, so if you try to put an image in, it's going to tell you, give us some alt text. Yay. And then coming in Drupal 8.4, possibly 8.5, but I think it's in the release candidate for 8.4, accessible inline form errors. So if you make a mistake on a form, it's going to give meaningful error messages to people that maybe have color issues seeing color, or people that use a screen reader. It'll help get them to the right parts of the page to correct their mistakes. So, you still have to bake accessibility into your site. Drupal 8 does a ton of this for you. It's awesome. But you still have to make sure as you develop, as you design, as you code, to make sure that that you bake it in. So, whoops, I got ahead of myself. There we go. So, you need to bake your accessibility into your design. We've got just some little turnovers here that you can fill with stuff. And so, yeah, you design something, it's like, yeah, you want to fill it with awesome content and graphics. So here, make your HTML standards compliant. Now again, Drupal 8 will do a lot of this out of the box, but as you develop stuff, you need to make sure that it stays standard compliant. Tag it in your wireframes. This kind of builds on the first session that we had today. They're talking about wireframing and building. Go ahead when you make your wireframes, put a tag in there. Show that, hey, this main title, that's an H1. This image is an image. Underneath here we have a subheading, that's an H2. Make it explicit to your developers and designers that this content needs to have specific code. Having unnested headings, not a deal killer, but it is confusing for screen readers who navigate by clicking through the headings. So it's kind of easy to build in, kind of hard to remediate. We've got a couple of examples I'll show you up here. So Missouri Department of Conservation, this is the site I work on most of the time. when you're trying to write valid code, there is a nice little plug-in for Chrome called Validate. And when you click that, it takes you to the W3C new HTML checker. And this will tell you everything that is technically wrong with your site. So even though I'm supposed to be an expert, you can see we have an awful lot. We have a lot of stuff here. A lot of it is some heading stuff, some XMLNS stuff that is kind of default in Drupal, but it's not quite working right. We've got some things where we have heading or IDs for stuff that's been duplicated, and that's part of a theming issue. It's like, okay, but we don't have a whole lot of significant structural semantic problems with this page. You know, most of this is with some attributes inside, but most of it's pretty good. Anyway, so there's a Chrome extension, and you can use this on any page. Validate, boom. And it will tell you everything that's wrong with your page. It's a great way to make sure that your markup is done up correctly, that there's no HTML errors in it. Cool thing about that, if your page is validating, it will generally speed up the rendering, which also helps with search results, not explicitly, and that's not accessibility related, but Google seems to bump it up a little bit. Let's see. We'll go back to some other examples in a couple of minutes, but move on since we're running late. So semantic markup, again, it's the most basic thing you can do. It's HTML 101. Most of this stuff hasn't changed significantly since the dark days of the internet back in the 90s. They've added stuff, they've deprecated stuff, but basically you want to make sure you've got headings, paragraphs, lists, you're using strong emphasis, you're using valid tags to mark up your code. And by doing this, you build a strong framework. Any screen reader, if you have someone using a screen reader, is going to be able to interpret everything on this page. So it just helps all the way through. One of the things to do, Drupal loves to do this, it does a lot of div tags. You know, it has content in divs. Bad, because divs don't have any semantic meaning. It's just like a box that you want to put something in, a paragraph or a heading. So part of that, you may have to fix that in theming, you may have to fix that in views, but add tags to those divs so that that content has some kind of meaning. Make your color palette, and again, this is a design when you're beginning to design, make it accessible. There's a color contrast ratio called 4.5 to 1 that applies to almost all text on your page. If you have a heading and things are bigger, it can be 3 to 1 contrast ratio. This is important for background colors, foreground colors, gradients, blocks, anything with color. And the reason why 1 in 8 men are colorblind, Northern European men are colorblind. 1 in 200 women are colorblind. And if you don't have enough contrast, they may not be able to tell what the text is on the page. As I get older, all those trendy designs with, you know, kind of white text on a gray background doesn't work so well anymore. That's a lot harder to see. So you can also use text and shapes to add meaning to some of the colors. Let me get a couple of examples. One of the things here that, again, this is our website, the Missouri Department of Conservation website, and the WAVE Web Access Evaluation Tool. This thing is awesome. It is free. It's updated regularly. If you hit the WebAIM website, which is the organization that has created this, tons of good easily digestible ways to make your site accessible, to interpret all of those guidelines that we have. And you can see on here we've got 14 instances of some very low contrast. And what this tool will do is highlight those. So you can see here under popular links, how do I? We have a light blue text on a beige background. And they're saying this is a problem. Okay, why is this a problem? Well, if we plug in the colors over here, and we can do that, you can do that with a little color checker. Pick a color, pop in, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing because I'm having trouble doing this looking backwards and stuff like that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If you're using Drupal 7, what's your...
Well, Drupal 7 is pretty accessible, as it turns out, but not nearly as accessible as Drupal 8.
Okay.
So there are quite a few accessibility features built in, but it's not as robust.
Okay.
So a lot of times you do have to do more work in your theming, in your views, to make any of that happen.
Now, like the Popups themes, they add that.
Most of the themes, in addition to being responsive, a lot of them have some accessibility features built in. There are some that are more accessible than others. Couldn't quite tell you which ones they are, but I know there's a couple of them that advertise themselves as being more accessible. It's like, awesome. So there's a couple of tools to test color contrast. And one that I'm showing on the page here is the Tanaguru Contrast Finder. And what I've done in the example, I've plugged in that light blue and the beige background. And it's telling me that the color ratio is 1.69 to 1, which is a far cry from 4.5 to 1. But then it goes on to give me suggestions on what colors would work with that. And so I just got the one that it shows a dark blue and gives a ratio of 4.50084, which is about as close to hitting that standard as possible. Without going under. The cool thing is, if you pick out a bunch of colors for your template and you kind of think, these look pretty good, and run them through a color contrast checker, a lot of times you'll find just moving them just a little bit on the color wheel. It doesn't take a whole lot of variation to bring them in line. So, unless you are really wedded to your colors, doing some tweaks like that make your site more accessible. As an aside, this happened with Drupal 8. They took the blue color that was in the default Bardic heading, and they took that blue heading and made it a little bit darker so that there was enough contrast between the white text and the title text on the page. And so it's like, we're going to change the way out-of-the-box Drupal works to make it more accessible. There's another tool that I would have loved to have shown you called Color Safe, and you plug in a background color and some text variables. It's colorsafe.co. It will give you a palette of colors that you can test against, or it'll tell you what the color contrast is. So again, a valuable tool.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
I've seen a few presentations, sort of general presentations about accessibility, and in one or two of them, the point was made that it's not really appropriate to always use alt text if
Right.
the image is decorative.
If it's purely decorative, you can leave alt text blank, but the way you do that is in your HTML. Alt text equals empty quotes. And the screen reader will just pass over that. The thing is, you don't want to just not have alt text in there. You want to have that attribute in your image
So
line.
if we're training our users, if we're making alt text required on images, and they think the image is purely decorative, the training message would be, just put
Yeah, you can do that, but depending on how much you trust your content people, you may want to double check to see if there is actual meaning in there. The other thing is if you have a collage of several images, you can use empty alt text for a lot of those images and just put all your alt text on one image. And so if you've got, say, you know, a bunch of animals that are, there we go, we have our professionals here.
I'm scared.
Yay, you fixed it.
No, I think you fixed it. There's someone
Okay.
there.
Also for the alt text.
Yeah.
How long should the text search any shorter, or like just go to script of what's happening?
I'm going to get to that in a minute, and that's a really good question. Short answer, make it like a tweet.
Okay.
But we'll get into some more detail on that. On the screen now, have an example of that Wave toolbar color contrast with my colors plugged in. You can see color contrast 1.4 to 1, not good enough, it fails. You can plug in new values. Oh, look, instant feedback on whether that is a valid color or not, valid color combination. Let's see, so being able to zoom at least 200% is a standard. People with low vision just may need larger text. So when they zoom, what happens to your site? If you've got a responsive site, it should snap to the next viewpoint. If it doesn't, they'll have to scroll to the left to see content. And if you have content changing, or if there's something they need to do on that other side of the page, like a submit button or something, they may never see it. So using responsive design, again, with Drupal, all of the designs are responsive. So yay, takes away some of that problem. You just have to make sure you don't mess it up. Oops. So make your tables data ready. Again, tables are for data. You want to make sure you're using proper table markup. Great thing is, Drupal 8 does this. It just does it. It's awesome. Using headings, using body, putting scope onto things. Drupal 8 will put ARIA tags in there to make sure that everything, to make sure it's more accessible. It's an amazing thing. So no pictures of text. This is another thing that's real simple to do. Don't use a picture of text. Use actual text. You can lay it over an image or a background or something. But you can see if somebody needs to zoom that text up, it starts getting blurry. And depending on your font, it may make it unreadable. Now, if you have logos that contain text, no problem there. Just your alt text for that is whatever the text of the logo is. So, you need to bake your accessibility into your content. Alt text enabled by default. Developers aren't always good alt text writers. Editors are usually good alt text writers. So, let them describe the content. Here's some examples, and see, I knew I'd get to you. We've got a picture. So, if I was presenting this to an audience where I knew there were some visually impaired people, like the folks that will watch this online, I would say, oh, we have a picture of a cat kind of sprawled on a floor inside in a sunbeam. Tells a story. Is it a calico cat? Yeah, well, I think maybe it's a tabby. I don't know my cats. But every accessibility presentation has to have a cat in it. That's a rule. So we have our cat picture. We have a St. Louis Drupal camp logo. And how do we describe that? It's a Drupal camp logo. That's not a description. It's a blue fleur-de-lis with a darker blue Drupal drop as the middle petal. You can say, oh, cookies. No, this is a mouth-watering stack of beautiful chocolate chip cookies. You can put a lot of emotion into that. If you're a news site, maybe not. You need to be more objective. But what's the message you want to get across? Way to think about this: if you were describing this to someone on the phone, what would you tell them about this photo? That's a really good way to kind of get your focus down. And you can do it as an example. Call someone, describe the photo, and then send them the photo and see if it matches what they said. It's like, ooh. Captions and text equivalents. Just if you have audio, here's an example on the MDC field guide page. We have a northern cardinal, and we have a little audio clip. There's a box with a little audio sign. You can click on that and listen to it. But if you don't have speakers, or you don't want to disturb your coworkers, or you can't hear, we also have a description of what those sounds sound like. So, you know, the call of a cardinal is a sharp chirp, chip, chip. But okay, great. You know, there's some kind of description. Use contextual links. We have some pictures of cookies here from a website, and there's view recipe, when you want to get the recipe. This is a problem because some screen readers, well, some users like to tab through, and they'll go through and hit all the links. What are they going to hear? See recipe, see recipe, see recipe. What recipe? I don't know. So the nice thing is you can do a couple of different things here. You can go ahead and say view chocolate chip cookie recipe or view classic snickerdoodle recipe. You can hide the name of the recipe visually, but still have it show up to a screen reader. By the same token, yeah, well, and then they have a contextual link. They know what they're clicking on. It's the same thing with, you know, click here. Don't say click here. Tell them where they're going. Tell them what they're clicking on.
Wait, how
Yes.
do you hide it? How do you hide it?
How do you hide it? You can use some CSS. Put the recipe in a span. If you're doing if you're using views, you can use tokens. So grab the title, put it in a span, put a hide from view CSS on it, so that a class on it, so it just doesn't show up on screen, but it gets read. So an example, can't show you that because I never have time to actually look at look at code and find good examples. And what works in one theme may not work in another. It's it's going to be customizable. So reading level. This is one of the things that you may do. The guidelines are kind of into you must do, you should do, and you may do. But this is something really important because you need to be aware of who your audience is. If you're writing to a college level audience, it's great to use big paragraphs, big blocks of text, and lots of complicated words. But most people want to scan the web. They want to get their information quick. So what you want to do is write to usually a 7th to 9th grade level. And you can test this in Word, just to, you can pull up a test when you go in to review your work. And it'll tell you, oh, here's a readability level. It's like, awesome. If it's too high, you always can edit it down. Use shorter words, shorter sentences. So, last bit, baking accessibility into site building. This was originally baking it into code, but I don't really code much, but I do a lot of site building. Keyboard access, being able to use your keyboard to tab through and hit everything that's important. We've got an example here of something from our events page on the MDC site. You can see there's a title of an event, a location and a date, and then a line that looks like a link that says read more. Well, that's just a little bit of JavaScript that only does something if you mouse over it. If you're tabbing through, because you don't use mouse, it just goes to the next one. You never find out what that content is. And what that content is, it would tell you, yeah, you need a reservation for this, or here's how you get a reservation for this program, and here's what the program's about, which is kind of important. So we fixed this mostly by just getting rid of the slider and displaying more content. But again, it was just a real simple thing that somehow didn't get tested, and so people missed out on content. So, easy test. Turn your mouse over, hit the tab key, hit the arrow key, see what you get to. No keyboard traps. Keyboard traps are evil. These are things, you have a pop-up, you have a widget, you have like a little light box or something that pops up, and it's not obvious how you get out of it, how you get back to the main content. So normally, it should just be an escape, but not always. Sometimes you'll see, oh, use Alt-A or something or Alt-X to get out of it. If it's not obvious, if you can't get out of it by hitting escape or entering content, you need to explicitly say, here's how you close this window. Drupal 8 has this built in. So calendar widget here from Drupal 8, boom. If you hit escape, it's gone. If you enter a date, it's done. You can go and tab through all of those dates to get to the right date. Again, all built in. Language. This is another easy one. You only do it once. You do it when you start building your site. You need to say, here's what language it's in, because that'll tell a screen reader how to read it. It's enabled by default. When you go to set up your Drupal 8 site, it'll ask you, what language you want this in? English. Or, if you're here in St. Louis, we've got a lot of immigrant population. There's a lot of Bosnians. If you need to provide content to them, have some pages in Bosnian, you need to indicate that language. Cool thing is, Drupal 8 makes it easy. Visible focus, this is another thing. Browsers kind of do this out of the box, but there was a trend 10 years or so ago. It's like, oh man, I really don't like it when there's a little underline under my links, and people would disable that focus. You want people to be able, as they tab through, to know where they are on the page. So again, kind of does this automatically. If we go, go over here and refresh and go to the top of the page. If we start tabbing through, very first thing up in the corner, we have a skip to main content that shows up. That's that skip nav. And then as we tab through, it's like, oh, look, hunting, fishing, trapping, trees. If we hit a down arrow, whoops, okay, good. This doesn't display the whole horrible mega menu. But you can always tell where you are on the page. And this is default browser behavior. Again, you can override it though. Don't. Consistent navigation, again, if you're using a theme, not really a problem. The skip nav, I mentioned Drupal 8 has it built in. Form labels. This is another thing, if you're building forms by hand, which why would you now, because you have Drupal, you just need to make sure that that they're labeled. Drupal 8 will do this for you automatically. So when you make a content type, when you use entity or web form, it will automatically create a label for you. Make sure that label is visible or available to the user. Don't hide it. So, after you've done all that, is accessibility baked in? No, it's a process. It's not a destination. You get better as you practice. It's like the Angry Bird cake. First one looks pretty hideous. After that, oh, you start to get better at it. If you want to know more, we've got some resources here, and these slides will be posted on the site whenever Jeff posts them on the site. And you can follow some of these people. These are folks that are heavy hitters in accessibility or Drupal accessibility. Mike Gifford is the core committer for accessible, all things accessible with Drupal. Carrie Fisher works for Hook 42 and is their accessibility lead. She posts a lot on Twitter. And again, a lot of these posts will just lead you to articles where you can learn more about this. WebAIM, I'm going to skip down a little bit. WebAIM, super resource. They're the ones that created the WAVE accessibility tool. And just lots of nice content there. So we don't really have time for questions, but I will be around the rest of the day and at happy hour. So if you have questions, stop me, ask me. Thank you to all of our sponsors. Thank all of you. Yeah, Chris.
You should have time. I don't think it's a talk in between this document.
Oh, really?
In this room.
Oh! Well, hell, we're going back and I'm adding to this one, man.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's go back then. Questions?
What level, like WCAG tool has?
There's 3 levels. There's 3 levels.
Try for.
I would shoot for AA. I have to because I'm government. The way that these levels are set up, there's A, AA, AAA levels of compliance with WCAG. Level A are things you really have to do to make your site compliant. If you don't do it, people will miss content on your site. If you don't have alt text, they're not going to be able to see part of your site. If you don't label your forms, they're not going to be able to interact with the forms. I've got a friend, totally blind, does most of her shopping online. She can, there's some sites she can go fill out the shopping cart. She can see these wonderful descriptions of products, add them to the shopping cart, go to checkout, and enter all of her information and her credit card, and she can't find the submit button because it's not labeled. It's like, not only did they lose a sale, but they lost a customer for life, basically. It's like, if they're not going to let me hit the button because they think I need to click the button. No, you should be able to use your keyboard to do that. So some of those things you have to do. There's other things that you ought to do. And government, we try to hit that AA standard. You get that AAA standard, and those are things you may do. And these are things that if you know you have a particular audience that you need to cater to, low vision, mobility issues, anything like that, you want to take that extra step and hit that AAA. You don't want your whole site to be AAA compliant, because if you do, it's going to be black and white with no pictures or hardly any pictures, not much multimedia. It's not going to be a very interesting site. And if you're trying to sell an idea or a product or services, you need to have, you can't cater to the few and kind of ignore everybody. You find that happy medium. And that's the thing about accessibility. You're not doing something special for people that have special needs. What you're doing is just making sure this stuff is available to everyone. You're removing barriers to people getting your content. Other questions? Hit me up afterwards and we'll go have a drink, we'll talk about it. Yeah, Chris.
Is there some kind of a linter that can help passively scan your code and say, hey, you're doing things wrong?
There's not a lot of free tools that will go more than page by page.
Well, what if it's not free?
Funny you should mention that. So one product we use is called SiteImprove. It's expensive. It's about $1 a page. And we've got thousands, tens of thousands of pages. But what it does is trickles through, it finds errors in your site, and also finds mechanical accessibility, or accessibility errors that it can find mechanically. I'll give you an example. We'll go to our main MDC site. We get a nice little dashboard. There's 61 broken links. Chris, you need to fix those. We've got misspellings. It goes kind of deep. We can set up other tests. But it'll also tell us about accessibility issues. We have 37 accessibility issues. Some of them are serious, some of them not as serious. Some of them are easy to change, some of them aren't. The cool thing about a tool like this, or just going through and systematically looking at your stuff, is you find a lot of things. You can change something in a theme and boom, it's fixed on thousands of pages. Anyway, it's a good tool, but you can use WAVE, you can use other tools to do this kind of testing. One other thing to remember, these mechanical tests only hit maybe 30 or 40% of the potential accessibility issues. So you still need to go in, manually test, and try different things. So, yeah, Adam.
Did you mention PA11Y?
I'm sorry, did I mention
PA11Y?
PA11Y?
Yeah.
I don't know PA11Y.
It's an open source
Oh,
scanner.
oh, okay. I don't know that. We can look that up. We can look that up after I turn off the mic and, and do that.
You won't be able to get it to
Well, just mostly because I can't see what I'm typing unless I turn around and type backwards, and somehow that doesn't work. So,
Oh, well, just give me a laundry list
yeah.
one day.
If there's anything else, yeah, just hit me up afterwards. Let's grab some cookies. I think there's still some cookies out there. Grab some water, and let's talk for the next hour or so till the next session.